Welcome to YIMBY Nation, a podcast exploring U.S. housing and the roadblocks to building more equitable neighborhoods. Join Jimmy, Peter, and V as they, and special guests, offer their unique perspectives on building more diverse communities and addressing the social problems that emanate from the lack of decent, safe, and affordable housing. Our hosts have served in the fields of advocacy and nonprofit, public, and private development, and are driven by their passion for community empowerment. Join the conversation and share your thoughts on social using hashtag YIMBYNation.
Welcome, YIMBY Nation. Thank you for joining us for our second season and third episode of 2024. Today's conversation is all about improving the quality of life for our communities by exploring the role that housing plays in food security. It has often been said that where you find food insecurity, you will find housing insecurity. And that's why the work of our guest is so important. Khaatim Sherrer is the executive director of Clinton Hill Community Action, a nonprofit community development corporation working to revitalize Newark's Clinton Hill neighborhood. He brings more than 20 years of experience leading place-based initiatives, managing strategic partnerships, and building organizational capacity. Since its founding in 2019, Khaatim has grown the organization to 23 full-time staff members with an annual budget of $4.5 million. 95% of the organization's staff lives in the neighborhood, representing $2.5 million of economic development being reinvested into the community. CHCA's priorities include housing and environmental justice, food security and economic justice, arts and creative placemaking, community building, and citizen journalism and advocacy. To date, with Khaatim's leadership, CHCA has assisted nearly 700 residents with securing emergency rental assistance to prevent evictions, cleaned up and added decorative murals on 62 abandoned properties, secured $700,000 in housing subsidy to build 10 new units of affordable housing, and collaborated with 8 local food pantries to serve 1,000 neighborhood residents in need each month. Khaatim is a graduate of Morehouse College. He earned a master's in organizational development with a concentration in change management and leadership from Teachers College at Columbia University. He was recently accepted into the highly competitive NeighborWorks Achieving Excellence Community Development Fellowship Program in collaboration with Harvard University. Welcome, Khaatim. Before we dive into today's topic, please share more about your story with our listeners. What inspired you to pursue work in community development and revitalization, and what drives you to continue it?
Yeah, well, first, Peter and Jimmy, I just want to thank you both for having me on. And hello, YIMBY Nation. I'm glad to now be a part of the family and have a story to tell. As I was hearing you read my bio, I was like, who is this guy you're talking about? He sounds pretty awesome. And just to know that that's just a little bit of the experience I've had and that's brought me to this work. Inspiration, we often go back to our parents, and it's not always the things that they say or do, but it's those moments. And I just remember as a kid, and back then I certainly didn't enjoy it, but I live in the Northeast here in Newark. It's home for me, and we get pretty bad winters, lots of snow. You're parking on the residential streets, and my dad would always make us, after a big snowstorm, not only shovel out his car, but the spot in front and then the spot in back. And I'm like, well, Dad, why are we doing that? We didn't shovel out your spot. We didn't got your car out. Why is it now my responsibility to shovel these other spots? He says, well, son, you got to remember that other people need spots too. And if you take the time to help somebody else out, you can always count on something being there for you. So I think about this work as not what I'm doing for others, but really what I'm doing for myself. Because as you said, Peter, not only do I work in the community where we do our business, but I live here too. So I want access to, quality housing. I want access to a nice commercial area. I want a place to walk my dog and, eventually have good schools to take my kids. And so as much as I'm doing for others, I'm reminded that I'm also doing for myself too.
That's terrific. We've seen reports that indicate that health disparities often correlate to housing conditions. Tell us more about the impact of CHCA in promoting well-being and healthier lifestyles as a result of improving housing conditions and opportunities. And how did your work evolve into increasing access to healthier food options?
Yeah. So I'll start with the connection on health and housing, and then we can talk a little bit about our work around food security because, we advocate so much just to have a roof over people's heads, but the quality of that roof really does matter. And if you've never had the experience of living in substandard housing, being in the cold winters and not having adequate heat, if you haven't met a family that's had that experience and then the kids have the sniffles and they start missing days of school as a result of not having a good quality heat, or, like the other day, we had a mom in our office who's living in an apartment that was recently flooded, and the landlord has yet to make any real repairs, and she's got mold growing up her walls. And we know that young kids in particular are susceptible to, some of these asthma triggers like mold that can be very serious. We've actually had kids die from unmanaged asthma. And talking about a healthy home even more, Newark is a proud city, a great city. It's my hometown, but we're also a old city. We've celebrated over 350 years as a city, and that also means that our housing stock is also really old. And for folks who follow this work, they all know that pre 1978, many of the homes had various uses for lead, whether it was lead pipes, lead paint. Um, um, and that lead is still in a lot of our homes. And again, young children are susceptible the most to the negative impacts of lead exposure, whether it's a little baby crawling around on the floor. And like all kids, right, they see stuff, they want to put it in their mouth and they pick up a piece of lead chip paint, or just the lead dust from the window seal being open, blowing into the room while a kid is sleeping. And what that then does to children's brain development and impairs their cognitive development. So there are deep, deep connections between health and housing. And we see it as a mission to one, raise awareness about that, right? So people know, right? Now it's not just about having a roof over your head, but the quality of that roof over your head matters. And we're about doing work to try to affect that. I can't do these circular conversations. We've been talking about lead in homes for a number of years. And, for me, I feel like our footprint, the Clinton Hill neighborhood in Newark, is small enough for us to be able to wrap our arms around the entire neighborhood, go door to door, and really lead a campaign to make our homes lead free. And that's through lead abatement, lead remediation. I mention that because it's both the problem, but it's also kind of thinking about ways we can go about the solution. And in the same way that the impacts on families, the impacts on the residents that we call neighbors, that also led us to our food work. We all remember, and some of us seem to forget, how dire of a situation the COVID-19 pandemic was for us, right? It seemed like yesterday for some or years ago for others, but I remember vividly, right? In our community, a lot of our folks work hourly wage jobs, and everything was shut down. So that meant no income coming into the home. So they couldn't even order an Uber Eats or a DoorDash or a grocery store delivery, let alone being safe enough to go out and venture to the grocery store, especially in the early days of COVID when we didn't even know what was happening. And, we have a very vibrant network of food pantries in our neighborhood. They're stewarded by the faith-based organizations. And those volunteers for those food pantries were often our senior citizens who were the most susceptible to the, impacts of COVID-19. So our pantries were shut down. So we literally had folks who were living in these COVID hotspots being told by officials, you shouldn't leave your house, you can't leave your house. And hell, a lot of them didn't want to leave their house because they were scared shitless. But the question was, well, how do we get food to you, right? And so we started a small project with a number of community partners called our Care and Share Pantries, where we worked with neighbors who were living in those COVID hotspots, who were raising their hands to volunteer to help get their other neighbors food. And our sort of contribution in that equation was we would bag up meals that would last a week for about 30 households. That's about the number of homes on a residential block. And those volunteers would make sure that they would get it to their neighbors, whether their neighbors came out to the tables they had set up in front of their homes, or they actually did the deliveries to some of the seniors who were homebound. But it was through that experience that it just opened my eyes. Like, I've always known that there are folks who go to bed hungry at night, but I didn't know how deep and pervasive that issue was. And certainly seeing a new crop of folks being exposed to pantries because, they were just in really financial dire times, really made it a priority work for us to see if we can't solve hunger.
I guess you make this personal because it comes out better and more authentic that way. So the family that you're talking about that grows up in a dilapidated, deteriorating home, that was me living in Alabama. We didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 14. Lived in a shotgun house. Mother was poor. I guess the word was object poverty is the word we used a lot back then. So, but luckily, rural poverty is a little bit different than urban poverty, as you may know. Mm-hmm. And so we had a garden. We raised fresh food. Our neighbors had pigs, and so we traded and bought it with them for meat. So we always had food. And I also lived in a food desert. I lived in an all black city, town in Alabama called Hobson City. So we with the food desert. So and both Peter and I have been in housing for decades. I've been in housing for almost 5 decades, working distressed communities, do housing. So I'm familiar with that aspect as well. But having grown up, being in a household where there was food, an ample supply of food, the thing that struck me about the food, you wouldn't call it insecurity, I guess, but the cultural and dietary preferences of people of my color. We prepared our food, but we didn't prepare it healthy. We overcooked it. We ate all the things that we should not have eaten. And as I only was able to break that cycle when I went to the college and I learned about a healthy diet and healthy food. What does your organization do to address this problem of that I'm talking about, the lack of knowledge about what constitutes a healthy meal and a healthy diet, and how to prepare that food is also important, because preparing with too much salt, too much of anything that's not good for you, overcooking it. I mean, does your organization deal with how to prepare a healthy diet and cook the meal healthy?
Yeah, and I'm glad you pointed that out, Jimmy, because you actually reminded me something of that project that I was talking about that we did during the COVID-19 pandemic, our Care and Share Pantry. So we take our cues from community residents, right? It's the way we build trust by listening and acting on what we hear and bringing people together to work collaboratively towards change. That's what you should hear throughout all the examples when I talk about our work. And, the Care and Share Pantry is just another one, right? So we started distributing those 30 bags to the blocks and we were doing our best to try to do bulk shopping in different places and just stuff the bags with things that we thought could last. And it wasn't until one of the residents told us, they said, hey, you're stuffing a whole bunch of carbs and starches and, high fructose corn syrup, sugary foods. And, it's a shame that in our, food ecosystem that's usually the cheaper things that you can get, especially in bulk, right? And so they gave us that feedback, and they actually sat down and worked with us to do another round of bulk shopping that included more diversity in what we were providing, right? So I'm right there with you, Jimmy. We do need to talk about health and nutrition and what we're putting in our body, and have a little bit more community education that takes us back to some of our roots in terms of growing our own food and eating more green vegetables and produce. So one of the things that we've added to our food work, right? Because our Care and Share Pantry and some of the other work that we do with our pantry network is all to sort of address the urgent need of hunger, right? Because there are folks who are literally going to bed without a meal. There are kids who are going to school and all they have to rely on is the lunch that they get from school, right? So we got to do something around the urgent need. But how are we getting in front of the train to sort of, change the trajectory, not only of what we have available to us, but what we consume, right? And so that's where things like our nutrition education work comes into play. And so we started Nourishing Newark, where we would have these these cooking demonstrations, and they were combined with a little physical activity, and we would introduce different vegetables in these cooking demonstrations that are not always the ones that we go to, right? But they were, well seasoned without all the salts. They were prepared in different ways. And, it's like one of those things when you get a chance to try something, that you didn't even think that, like, what are you going to do with arugula? What are you going to do with, oh gosh, what is, I'm trying to think of, asparagus and all some of these other green vegetables that are not as common in our everyday diet. But when you get them and they taste good and you have that recipe that comes along with the donation of the fresh fruits and vegetables, it goes a long way. We started a farmer's market in collaboration with the Greater Newark Conservancy, who stewards one of the largest urban farms in New Jersey right in our neighborhood. It's over 2 acres of farm space in the middle of a concrete jungle. It's amazing. They've got fruit trees there. They're growing other produce that they sell at their farm stand. There are plots available for residents to, grow and, consume their own foods. And so it's just been an incredible partnership where every month we're doing these farmers markets, and we have, local farmers on hand that are, distributing fresh fruits and vegetables. We've got our seniors coming from our local senior facilities, and they're getting the SNAP benefits and being able to maximize their purchase when they're at the farmers market. We're putting money in the hands of residents by way of stipends for the early birds who arrive. So they've got an extra $25 to do some shopping. But we don't stop there. We purchased this thing. It's called a Charlie cart, but it really is a kitchen on wheels. And we roll out the Charlie cart, and we have local chefs that come through and they prepare these different dishes just to get people to try to, one, even think about ways to cook traditional meals, like let's say macaroni and cheese, right? Have you ever had cauliflower and cheese?
Yeah, that's terrific.
Slightly healthier option, has a similar texture and taste to the traditional macaroni and cheese, but it's a lot more healthier for you.
Did you say cauliflower and cheese?
Yes.
I'm supposed to take my macaroni out of my cheese and put cauliflower in there?
Replace it with cauliflower. And
more power to you, Peter.
Yeah.
Blend it up. It's kind of like it's an alternative to mashed potatoes, actually.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, there's all these different ways that you can be creative about even some of the more common meals that we're used to eating. But switching it up just a little bit to make it healthier. And we see it as our responsibility through some of our nutrition education efforts to try to introduce those opportunities.
I'm really grateful that you're addressing this whole issue of addressing not just the food, lack of food, the food deserts, but also changing the trajectory of how people eat, because I know how important it is. I know a lot of my health conditions that I now have at my age emanate from how I ate for the first, 25 or 30 years of my life. And I realized that some of those things that you do can't be undone, right? So it's just so important that the work that you're doing to address those issues. I may even try the cauliflower and the
We'll send you the
cheese. Is that
recipe.
right?
We'll send you the recipe.
Please send me the recipe. I'm definitely going to try it. My grandmother would probably turn over in her grave. But also, getting back to the housing part of it, I think the question is, the Clinton Hill section of I was in Newark also. I was deputy at the housing authority there for 2 years. The Clinton Hill section of Newark, that is, give me my bearings as to where that is.
We're in the South Ward. You've got Clinton Avenue as one of our major corridors right off of Bergen Street. Just to entice folks to come on and visit us. We are home to the first M&M factory on Badger Avenue. Dr. King visited our community not once, but twice. He stopped by the former temple B'nai Abraham and visited the radical rabbi Yochum Prince, who was a very prominent Jewish rabbi in our community, and also made a stop to what was then Southside High School, now Shabazz High School.
I know where you're at, Shabazz High School.
Yeah,
okay. I got my bearings now. You being a nonprofit, you work a lot with the city of Newark, and you have a partnership with the city of Newark. What role do they play in the work that you do?
Yeah, I think I've come along in this community development work at an incredible time, right? I think leadership matters at all levels in our organization and, of course, in the city. Our mayor, Raj J. Baraka, he comes out of the sort of organizing tradition and really respects and sees the power in the people. It's not just a slogan when he ran for mayor and said, when I became mayor, you become mayor. He really meant it, right? He wanted to start to let go of this notion that, city government or government in and of itself would solve everybody's problems, but that the people of the city also have a responsibility to be engaged as a part of being active change agents. And so he's implemented a number of progressive initiatives that's made community development, I think, hot again. Because if you've been tracking the work, it sort of had its ebbs and flows, right? I think, from my study of the movement, it started off as just that, a movement, like a really sort of grassroots commitment to community change. And then we got real comfortable in a lot of the federal funding that was coming through community development, state funding, and we became institutions, right? We weren't solving problems, we were treating the symptoms through social services. And so we see ourselves as an organization, as a advocacy organization more so than a social service organization, because we're trying to create change on the issues that we care about. And so, just to give you a couple of examples, part of the opening that Peter shared in my bio, that $700,000 in affordable housing subsidy came from the city of Newark. They leveraged some of that COVID money to put in the hands of nonprofits to work with developers to bring online the kind of housing that we're going to need in the city long term. In addition to that, the food work that we were just talking about, again, the city thinking outside of the box about, one, their role, but ways that they can leverage their resources. They gave us our biggest chunk of funding to help us, support the farmers market that we manage and start one of the first resident-run food co-ops right here in the Clinton Hill section. And there's a number of policies that the mayor's implemented, everything from, requiring landlords to get the green light that their apartments are, of a certain standard to be rented. So the habitability ordinance, rent control, right? That gives us a tool to support residents who are dealing with tenant landlord issues when they're just trying to, jack up the rent and get as much as they can. And I just mentioned that to say that, in some, we've got a mayor who gets it, right? That his administration alone can't solve the city's challenges, and he needs sort of the rich fabric of community development organizations that we have in the city as partners to move forward a lot of the good ideas that are coming out of the city.
That's terrific. You don't find that kind of leadership every day.
No,
That's really exceptional.
Yeah.
Sort of going back to the cultural impacts, what are your thoughts on the impact of advertising and marketing on health and food disparities? And sort of coupled with that, what's been the impact of the fast food industry in the communities you've worked with?
Yeah. I was wondering where you were going there, Peter, because I said, I don't know if I've seen too much advertisements on, eating better, eating healthy. What
Unless
I see
it's,
yeah, it's eating quick and eating cheap, right? So
well, supposedly that's how it's advertised. It's not so cheap.
And it's not so cheap in a number of ways, not only in the pricing of it, right? Like what you can get if you went to the grocery store and got some hamburger meat and made your own hamburger, how many hamburgers you can make versus going to buy them, but then also on your health impacts. We are inundated by, unhealthy food options, whether it's the fast food chains or the corner stores. God bless them for sort of being a gap in what is, as Jimmy referred to several times, this food desert. A city, major city, largest city in the state of New Jersey, Newark, with over 370 odd thousand residents. We only have one major grocery store.
Wow.
And I'll tell you what, it's not in my backyard, right? So folks who live next door to me have to catch maybe one or two buses to try to get there if they were taking the bus. And if you can imagine all of those residents descending on that one place at one time, how you would feel standing in those lines and your willingness to do that. We truly are living in a food desert. And the options that we're left with are oftentimes the more expensive, as you really pointed out there, Peter, and the least healthy. But
yeah, local bodegas and fast food, right?
Yeah. I think we're doing a little bit of a counter narrative, though. And some of the work that we're doing, whether it's, through the farmer's market, just the idea, right? Whether you've been to the farmer's market that we host on a monthly basis or not. And we're not the only partner in the city who hosts farmers markets. These things are happening all over the city. It's just creating a conversation and an entry point that otherwise would not exist for folks to say, let me go check out what's happening over there, or just making folks think that, either I can be a part of growing my own food or I've got a place that I can go if I want to get something that just comes straight out of Mother Earth. And we really do need to start asking questions about where our food comes from.
Peter, let me jump in too.
Sure.
I can remember when I was at the University of Wisconsin, and I lived in the housing complex, and we had a food cooperative. And for me at the time, and I have any money, it was lifesaver. Do you have any? Because since as I said, Peter and I are in distressed communities all our lives. I'm working on a Choice Neighborhood project. We have a community. There's only one semi-major store for the entire community, and getting anywhere else requires getting a bus or Uber. So while I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about how I'm going to put what you're talking about to work. In fact, I have a meeting tomorrow night talking about people aspect of the Choice Neighborhood. One of the big things obviously is food. We're working with a local organization now to do a truck farmers market. I think we're going to get that started maybe next week. So I'm really into this whole thing about food. As you can see, is really important to the neighborhood, to living a healthy life, the lifespan expectancy of folks in that community is a lot less than it is for the rest of the surrounding areas, especially the suburban. There's a huge difference in the life expectancy, huge. So this is real. stuff that really affects your life, right? So, cooperative. Have you started any food cooperatives? Are you thinking about starting any food cooperatives? Because we can't get the stores to come in to our neighborhoods. I'm looking at long term how we can address these problems ourselves. So, what about a food cooperative?
I think you said it, Jimmy. It's like, what can we do for ourselves, right? So we are not waiting for Superman in the Clinton Hill section, right? We have heard time and time again from folks in our community that we want a grocery store that has, healthier food options, more affordable food options, higher quality food options. It's almost like, the years and years of sort of desiring that. At some point you're out there begging for it, right? And so for us as an organization, we don't believe that we do for community. One of our organizing principles is that we do with community. My colleague, who is driven by her faith, would say she wants folks in our community to be a part of their own deliverance. And so we are starting our first resident-run food co-op. I don't want to lay claim to a success market that I don't have the full history of, but from the folks that I've talked to, it'll be one of the first for the city of Newark in terms of truly an organic coming together of neighbors working together over a year or more to sort of build this concept, own this concept, and run it. And it'll be right here in the Clinton Hill section. We were very fortunate to get funding from the state that's providing us monies to do a planning grant. And one of our foundation partners, the Healthcare Foundation of New Jersey, took a bet on us. And for the last 3 years has provided very substantial funding to help seed the sort of coming togethers of this. And we didn't know where it was going to go. We didn't even know if it was even feasible from either an economic standpoint or people capacity standpoint. But time and time again, my people step up and they, wow me with their commitment to wanting to be a part of something that's moving forward. So we're starting this food co-op. It's scheduled. The first phase of it is scheduled to open in the next month or so. It's under the banner of a mutual aid grocery store. And mutual aid grocery store, very similar to the food co-op model, where it still is very much community driven, membership based. But we're offering this first edition for what we're calling a pay what you can afford model, right? That would obviously be subsidized by philanthropic donations and food donations and people who can afford to pay a little extra. But those members, our neighbors, the residents in the community, will be able to come into the grocery store and get some of the staples and goods, including fresh fruits and vegetables that they need on a more immediate basis. And the reason why we got to the mutual aid grocery store as a concept in the step to us opening the food co-op, it was just stepping back and listening to folks. It's great that we've got over 15 pantries who are doing distributions throughout our neighborhoods at different times of the month, right? But again, those pantries have schedules, but your hunger isn't based on that schedule. And so what do you do in the meantime if that pantry is only given out once a month, or this pantry is only doing it every other week? And, what do you do in the meantime? So the mutual aid grocery store is going to be a place that's open every day where people can come. They will be not only, coming to get food, but they'll be coming there to volunteer their time to help run it. And certainly, being out in the community to help us promote it and keep the doors open.
I want our listeners to know that. Hold on, Peter. I want our listeners to know that question was not a setup. I did not know what your answer was going to be. So I just want to let them know that was spontaneous and that I'm very happy about the mutual housing, our food venture. And I'll be calling on you to come here to New Haven to help us get something started in the Hill community that we're working on now. So
yeah, and Jimmy, you have another reason to come by, because the mutual aid grocery store is going to have a juice bar.
Okay,
and
all right,
nice.
In some of our preliminary outreach in the community, that's just not something that we have readily available. There's a whole lot of places you can get soda and high fructose corn syrup, but where can you get a nice smoothie? Where can you get a healthy Jamba like juice? And it'll be right here in this concrete jungle that we call home.
Okay.
And if you want to sell, healthy eating habits, nothing like a juice bar to start that.
There you go. There you go. There you go.
That's terrific.
I've got an incredible team, guys, that, I'm just here as a spokesperson talking about their incredible work that they do. And they're taking sort of the small vision that I've given them places that I didn't even imagine. So not only is the juice bar an addition that I wasn't conceiving of, but we're actually going to have, Peter, a tea wall. Check us out, where we'll have and some of the herbs for the teas will be coming from some of our local community gardeners. But we'll also be offering sessions about the different types of teas that you can use to deal with some of, the ailments that we have, whether you have an
Exactly.
upset stomach, you're dealing with a little bit of stress, you're having a little trouble sleeping. Instead of relying on, pharma or, other alternatives, here's a little herbal contribution to help you that's a lot healthier for you.
That's terrific. Oh, you guys are doing some great stuff.
Thank you.
So, Khaatim, you've managed significant philanthropic investments, including the $100 million gift from Mark Zuckerberg for Newark schools. How did this experience shape your approach to community development and educational initiatives at CHCA, and how much has that changed what you're able to do from prior to that point?
Yeah. Thank you for taking me back to those days, because I want to say that my steps have really been ordered to really prepare me well for this role now. Because I think if I had not had some of those experiences, I'd be thinking very differently about the work. And one of the ways I'd be thinking differently is just what the influence of money can do, right? Like, we tend to think that money can solve all problems. And that's the first point I'll make. Even with $100 million, which turned out to be almost $200 million going into the school system, it was a huge injection of cash that allowed us to innovate and kickstart and accelerate some things. But it's not everything. Money doesn't solve all of the problems, right? Which for us, we think about what we're bringing to the table when we talk to our partners in the funding community, that's just as valuable. And that's the power of people, right? The sweat equity, the commitment, the investment of time and effort oftentimes surpasses sort of the cash that is on the table. To sort of, it certainly greases the skids and gets things going and keeps the doors open, but it's not everything. The other thing that I would say that experience taught me in terms of what money does in this kind of community change and place-based work is, you got to be really careful that you don't let the tail wag the dog.
Yeah.
And sometimes the money has a way of moving you in directions that are not necessarily aligned with where the people are, right? And then you say, well, we spent all this money doing this, or we, invested this, and look at it a year later, it's either not being used or it's, in disrepair already. And we forget the important part of tapping into, well, where are the people in this equation, right? What's important to them, and how then do those investments align with those priorities of community? How do those investments get shaped by the wants, the desires, the dreams and aspirations of the community, so that the two go down the same road, not, one dragging the other, right? The money saying, this is where we should be and what we should be doing, and therefore people should be grateful and want whatever it is that the money created.
Yeah, if people don't have pride in the outcomes, they're not going to be investing in them and making sure that, this ball keeps rolling down the road.
Yeah, totally. I'd be remiss to say, though, we've seen some incredible things that money has allowed us to do. And if I could just give a nod on this one point, in terms of, when you get a big funder like Mark Zuckerberg, and in our case, the Mark Charitable Foundation, who really gets behind the kind of work that you're doing, and you can align sort of that community and vision with the investment, which you're able to accomplish. I'm very proud to say that we are home to the Clinton Hill Early Learning Center that was funded solely by this family foundation because of their belief in young children and their belief in this community, and helped to not only build a child care center that now serves 198 children who needed a home and needed a high quality early childhood education, but the place where we built it was fulfilling a promise to the community that was broken more than 20 years ago when the state came in and used eminent domain to clear land, which were people's homes, right? It was a community, it was stores, it was fabric, it was vibrant, with the promise of building a school that never came to pass. And so this land sat fallow for a number of years, almost more than 20. And taking that sort of promise of an educational use for this land, hearing from community that we need more access to high quality early childhood education. Now, here's where philanthropy and sort of that kind of investment can make a difference. And now we're home to this world-class center that, we're really, really proud of.
That's terrific.
I think here's the part of our podcast where we throw our doors open to you. And then if there are some words of wisdom, some ideas, some concepts that some takeaways that you could leave our listeners with, I know they will be excited to hear them. I know I'm just excited by what you talked about so far, and I think the way you are involved in your community, the way you understand the connectivity between all these different components of a holistic life. So I'm just very interested in what you can leave our listeners with today.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that question, Jimmy, because I often, I'm reluctant sometimes to have these conversations about the work we do in the community, not because I'm not proud of what we're doing, not because we're not doing good work, but I never want to be in a poverty porn conversation. I never want to be in a conversation where we're talking about how destitute the community is and, and let's give from our heart to help. And, and there's a place for that, right? And there's room for that conversation in terms of recognizing sort of the historical disparities that come out of, systemic oppression and racism. But on the other side of that is, like my grandfather used to say all the time, there's nothing new under the sun. Some of the tried and true principles of community development that we're leveraging. And one of them is assets-based community development. So we don't see the glass as being half empty, right? We look at the vacant storefronts. We look at the folks who said, I want to roll up my sleeves and do something. And we see a food co-op. We see a food co-op and the energy that's coming around that and saying, oh, wow, maybe this is how we can bring back Main Street through a cooperative economic strategy. So what other businesses do residents want to come together and start because they fill a gap that's needed in our community? We look at the fact that we have the largest urban farm in the state of New Jersey in our own backyard, and we say we want to leverage that place to start a farmer's market. So we have all of these things that we are building on as a community that I think is making our work very different from that deficits-based, responding to crisis, social service kind of orientation, right? And I want to believe that the trust that we've built in the community is because we don't see our people as being broken, right? We see them as being a part of the solution. And that's really my second point, and something that I really, really strongly encourage. And that is this idea of, taking the time for those who are most impacted by the issues to be not just telling us which way to go, but around the table, rolling up their sleeves, doing the work with us, right? So many of us got the first part of this right. We'll survey communities to the wazoo, right? We'll do focus groups, we'll do listening sessions, and then we leave the table with this notion that, there's nothing left in community to actually contribute in doing the work, whether the skill sets, the expertise, the knowledge and all that other kind of stuff is not there. Quite the contrary. Like in the opening in our bio and talking about Clint Hill Community Action, we made an intentional decision that we wanted to test the theory. What does community look like when it's led by the people who are most impacted, right? What kind of results do you get? What kind of traction do you get? What kind of depth in the work do you see? And, as we said earlier, 95% of the folks who work for our organization live in this community. And people have been, not me, because I knew it was there, surprised to some extent that we have the talent. But for folks having the experience to be an organizer, to be around the table talking about the food ecosystem and some of the other sort of social justice issues that we're working on as it relates to housing and all these other kinds of things, they just haven't had the opportunity to be actively engaged in that work. And folks want to be. And so we're taking it upon ourselves to grow the next generation of community development leaders through this organic process of hiring from the community, investing deeply in their training and professional development, and setting them off in the world to, help us continue to do the work we're doing here in Clinton Hill, but take those skill sets, take that knowledge base, take the sort of continuing education that we encourage people to do into other areas and in other communities who might need their talents. And so, I'll say in short, power to the people, and that there is power in the people. And we just have to believe that and figure out ways to harness that, leverage that for the kind of change that we want to see in our community.
I really appreciate your leaving us with that perspective, Khaatim. I think, some of our listeners may take this in and think, well, if I had these major philanthropic investments in my community, I could do all these things too. But in fact, what you're pointing to are the things that are available to any community if you're able to connect with the people who live there and listen to them and get them engaged and involved. I mean, the basic community organizing that you're doing is really the glue of what's allowing all of this to come to fruition. We didn't have the time to get into the nuts and bolts of how you develop leadership and organization and how people are involved in all of these different initiatives that you take. But, it's very clear that the principles are in place for people to lead these efforts. And then it's, up to you and your staff to put the organization together to see it through.
Yeah. Well, thank you both, Peter and Jimmy. And I'd love to come back and talk about some of those nuts and bolts, and really appreciate this opportunity to tell a piece of our story.
Likewise. So, Khaatim, thank you for the powerful perspectives you shared with YIMBY Nation today. At YIMBY Nation, we aim to highlight efforts that promote community empowerment, economic development, resident self-sufficiency, and transformation. And the work you're doing with food security and housing development in general, as well as all of the other examples that you shared today, are a stellar example. So thank you.
Thank you as well.
Thanks for joining us and listening to today's episode of YIMBY Nation. Continue the conversation in your communities and on social using #YIMBY Nation. Connect with V at www.vaseconstruction.com. Connect with Jimmy at www.sincereconsulting.com. And connect with Peter by searching Collaborative Development Consulting on LinkedIn.com. Please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform so we can continue helping communities thrive. Email us at contact@yimbynation.com or visit the podcast website at www.yimbynation.com. Until next time.